Nexus Station floated in the darkness between three star systems, a massive structure of metal and light where thousands of beings from dozens of worlds came to trade, negotiate, and sometimes disappear. The station had no true laws, only agreements between powerful groups who kept order through mutual self-interest. It was the kind of place where a person could find anything they needed, as long as they had credits and did not ask too many questions. Danny Cole walked through the crowded market level with his hands in his jacket pockets and his eyes watching everything. He was 32 years old, average height, with brown hair that needed cutting and a face that most people forgot within minutes of meeting him. This suited Danny perfectly. He had spent years learning that being forgettable was one of the most useful skills a human could have in a galaxy full of species who considered humanity little more than clever animals. He had just finished a 3-month job hauling cargo through contested space, dodging pirates and bribing customs officials at every stop. The payment for this work was stored on a small data chip in his inner pocket, coordinates to a salvage site worth more credits than he had earned in the previous 5 years combined. He planned to collect supplies, refuel his ship, and leave Nexus Station within 2 days. He did not trust this place, and he certainly did not trust the various creatures watching him from the shadows of the marketplace. Danny stopped at a food vendor and ordered something that claimed to be similar to Earth coffee. It tasted like burnt metal mixed with regret, but it contained enough caffeine to keep him alert. As he drank, he let his gaze wander across the crowd, cataloging faces and movements the way he had been trained to do during his years as a security consultant before he became a cargo hauler. 3 merchants argued over the price of engine parts. A pair of soldiers moved through the crowd with the careful alertness of people expecting trouble. A group of traders displayed glowing fabrics that shifted colors with every movement. And there, near the entrance to the lower levels, a young female watched him with careful intensity while pretending to examine a display of navigation equipment. Danny noticed her immediately. They were a cat-like species with lean bodies built for speed and grace. They had large eyes adapted for darkness, retractable claws hidden in their fingertips, and a culture that valued cleverness above all other traits. This particular was young, probably equivalent to her early 20s in human terms. Her fur was a deep gray that would blend perfectly into shadows, and her clothes were practical but worn at the edges. She carried herself with the tension of someone who had not slept well in many days. She had been following him for 2 days now. Danny finished his terrible coffee and continued walking, giving no sign that he had noticed his shadow. He moved through the station with the casual pace of someone who had nowhere important to be, stopping occasionally to examine goods he had no intention of buying. Each time he stopped, the girl adjusted her position to keep him in sight. She was good at following people, but Danny had spent years learning to spot exactly this kind of surveillance. He wondered what she wanted. His ship was decent but not valuable enough to steal. His cargo holds were empty after his last delivery. The only thing of real value he carried was the data chip, and very few people knew about that. Perhaps she was simply targeting him because he was human, and humans had a reputation in this part of the galaxy for being easy victims. Many species believed that humans were too trusting, too soft, too naive to survive in the harsh reality of interstellar civilization. Danny smiled slightly to himself. That reputation had saved his life more than once. He made his way to a cantina on the station's middle level, a place where traders and spacers gathered to drink and exchange information. The establishment was dimly lit and filled with smoke from a dozen different species' preferred intoxicants. Danny found a table in the corner where he could watch the entrance and ordered a drink he did not plan to finish. The girl entered a few minutes later. She moved to the bar and ordered something, positioning herself where she could observe him in the reflection of the bottles behind the counter. Her large eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, and Danny could see the slight twitch of her whiskers as she tracked his movements. He sat alone for an hour, nursing his drink and appearing lost in thought. He let his shoulders slump and his expression grow tired. He looked like exactly what she probably expected. A weary human far from home, distracted and vulnerable, carrying something valuable enough to make him a worthwhile target. When Danny finally stood and left the cantina, he walked with the heavy steps of someone ready for sleep. He moved away from the populated areas of the station, toward the quieter sections where maintenance corridors connected different levels. These passages were used mostly by station workers and people who wanted to avoid attention. They were also excellent places for crimes to happen without witnesses. Danny entered one of these corridors and walked until he reached a junction where 4 passages met. The lighting here was poor, with half the panels flickering or completely dark. The sound of the station's life support systems created a constant low hum that would mask quiet footsteps. It was, he thought, the perfect place for an ambush. He stopped walking and waited. Behind him, he heard the soft sound of someone trying very hard to move silently. There were natural hunters, capable of moving without making noise that most species could detect. But Danny had learned long ago that perfect silence was almost impossible. There were always small sounds: the whisper of clothing, the faint click of claws on metal, the subtle displacement of air. He turned around slowly, keeping his hands visible and his posture relaxed. The girl stood 10 meters away, a pulse knife glowing in her hand. The weapon hummed with contained energy that could cut through flesh and light armor with equal ease. Her ears were flat against her skull, and her lips were pulled back to show sharp teeth. Danny looked at her calmly and said nothing. She took a step forward, her voice tight with forced confidence as she demanded he give her his credits and the data chip he carried. Danny tilted his head slightly, studying her the way he might study an interesting puzzle. He noticed the slight tremor in the hand holding the weapon. He saw how her eyes kept flickering to the corridor behind her, checking for escape routes. He observed the desperate hunger in her expression, the fear hidden behind her aggressive posture. This was not a professional criminal. This was someone who had run out of options. Danny remained still and asked her a simple question. He asked what had happened to make her desperate enough to try robbing a stranger in a dark corridor. The question clearly surprised her. Her ears lifted slightly with confusion, and for just a moment the mask of threat slipped to reveal the scared young woman underneath. Then her expression hardened again, and she raised the pulse knife higher, demanding once more that he hand over everything of value. Danny sighed quietly and prepared himself for what would happen next. He had given her a chance to talk. Now he would have to show her that humans were not the easy prey the galaxy believed them to be. Watched humans for 3 weeks before choosing her target. She had studied their movements, their habits, and their weaknesses. Every piece of information she had gathered told her the same story. Humans were a young species, barely a century into their exploration of the galaxy. They were physically unremarkable, lacking the strength of the speed of her own people, or the armored hides of the. They were trusting to the point of foolishness, often forming bonds with strangers after only brief conversations. They were, in simple terms, easy prey. The man standing before her did not seem to understand this. He should have been afraid. She had a weapon. She had the advantage of darkness where her eyes worked far better than his, and she had cornered him in a place where no one would hear his calls for help. Every other being she had threatened in her brief criminal career had shown fear. They had trembled, begged, offered everything they had in exchange for their safety. This human simply looked at her with calm interest, as if she were a puzzle he was trying to solve rather than a threat he needed to escape. Tightened her grip on the pulse knife and stepped closer. She told him again to hand over his credits and the data chip she knew he carried. Her voice came out sharper than she intended, betraying her nervousness. The human, whose name she did not know yet, nodded slowly as if considering her demand. Then he asked another question. He asked how long she had been following him. The question caught her off guard. She had been so careful. She had used every technique her people were known for, staying in shadows, moving only when he was distracted, never letting him see her directly. The idea that he had noticed her surveillance seemed impossible. She told him it did not matter and demanded he stop asking questions. He smiled slightly, a small expression that held no fear at all. He told her she had been following him for exactly 2 days. He described the first time he had spotted her, near the docking bay where his ship was stored. He listed 3 other occasions when he had noticed her watching him, including the cantina earlier that evening. He even described the pattern of her surveillance, how she always stayed exactly 15 meters behind him in crowded areas and moved closer in empty spaces. Felt cold shock run through her body. No one had ever detected her surveillance before. Her people were hunters, trackers, masters of stealth developed through thousands of years of evolution. This human, this soft, clawless creature from a world on the far side of the galaxy, should not have been able to see through her techniques. She demanded to know how he had spotted her. The human shifted his weight slightly, a subtle movement that barely noticed. He explained that humans had evolved differently than her people. They were not fast or strong or equipped with natural weapons. Instead, they had developed other abilities. They could read tiny changes in behavior and body language. They could recognize patterns that others missed. They could predict what another being would do based on subtle cues that most species never noticed. He told her that she moved like a hunter, which meant she was used to following prey that could not fight back. She checked her escape routes too often, which meant she was more afraid than she appeared. And she held her weapon like someone who had learned to use it from watching others rather than from proper training. Felt her confidence crumbling with each word he spoke. Everything he said was true. She was not a real criminal. She was a cargo handler who had fallen into debt and seen no other way out. She had stolen the pulse knife from a drunk spacer. She had never actually hurt anyone in her life. Her hesitation lasted only a second, but it was enough. She lunged at him, using the speed and agility that made her people feared across the galaxy. She aimed the pulse knife at his shoulder, intending to wound him enough to make him compliant without causing permanent damage. The human moved. He did not try to match her speed. Instead, he stepped to the side at exactly the right moment, letting her pass by so closely that she felt the fabric of his jacket brush against her arm. Her blade cut through empty air where he had been standing a heartbeat before. Spun and attacked again, slashing in a wide arc that should have been impossible to avoid. Again, the human moved, shifting his body with an economy of motion that wasted nothing. He seemed to know where she would strike before she decided to strike there. She attacked 3 more times, each assault faster and more desperate than the last. Each time he avoided her blade with the same calm precision. He never tried to hurt her. He simply was not there when her weapon arrived. Finally, exhausted and frustrated, made a mistake. She overextended on a thrust, leaving her balance compromised for just an instant. The human moved inside her guard. One hand caught her wrist and twisted, applying pressure to a nerve cluster that made her fingers go numb. The pulse knife clattered to the floor. His other hand pushed against her shoulder, using her own momentum to spin her around. Before she understood what was happening, she was pressed against the corridor wall with her arm pinned behind her back. She waited for the pain. She waited for him to break her arm or call for station security or simply kill her for daring to attack him. These were the outcomes she had expected from the moment she decided to become a criminal. Instead, he asked her another question. He asked why she was really doing this. His voice was calm and genuinely curious. There was no anger in it, no threat, no satisfaction at having defeated her. He sounded like someone who actually wanted to understand. Felt something break inside her, some wall she had built to protect herself from the reality of what she had become. She told him everything. She told him about her job loading cargo for a shipping company that had gone bankrupt. She told him about the loan she had taken from a crime lord named to pay for her mother's medical treatment back on there. She told him about the interest rates that had turned a manageable debt into an impossible burden. She told him that it had given her 3 days to pay what she owed or face consequences that terrified her to imagine. When she finished speaking, tears were running down her fur-covered face. She felt ashamed and broken and empty. The human released her arm and stepped back. He picked up her pulse knife and examined it briefly before powering it down. Turned to face him, expecting contempt or pity or cold indifference. Instead, she saw something unexpected in his eyes. She saw understanding. He told her his name was Danny Cole. He told her that he knew of and the suffering that criminal had caused to legitimate traders throughout this sector. He told her that had stolen cargo from him twice in the past year and had threatened his crew when they tried to file complaints with station authorities. Then Danny said something that never could have predicted. He asked if she wanted to help him destroy instead of running from him. Stared at the human as if he had suddenly started speaking a language she did not understand. She had just tried to rob him at knife point. She had attacked him with intent to cause harm. By every law and custom she knew of, he had every right to turn her over to station security or handle her punishment himself. Instead, he was offering her a partnership. She asked him if he was insane. Danny laughed, a genuine sound that echoed strangely in the dark corridor. He told her that many people had asked him that question over the years. He admitted that by the standards of most species, humans probably did seem a little insane. They formed bonds with creatures that could kill them. They trusted strangers based on feelings rather than evidence. They gave second chances to people who had tried to hurt them. Did not know what to say. Her entire understanding of how the galaxy worked was based on simple principles. The strong dominated the weak. Trust was a weapon to be used against the foolish. Mercy was a luxury that only the powerful could afford. This human seemed to operate according to entirely different rules. Danny handed back her pulse knife. He told her she would need it if she agreed to help him. Then he started walking deeper into the maintenance corridor, clearly expecting her to follow. Stood frozen for several seconds. She could run. The path behind her led back to the populated areas of the station where she could disappear into the crowd. She could forget this strange human and his impossible offer. She could spend her last 3 days hiding from enforcers and hopping for a miracle. Or she could follow him and discover what he was planning. She followed. Danny led her through a maze of service passages until they reached a small storage room that he had apparently claimed as a temporary workspace. Inside, a portable terminal displayed maps of the station, financial records, and what appeared to be surveillance footage of his compound. Looked at the information with growing surprise. She asked how long he had been gathering this. Danny told her he had been collecting data on for 8 months. The crime lord had stolen a shipment from him that had taken 2 years to arrange, a cargo of rare medical supplies destined for a colony suffering from a plague outbreak. Because of that theft, 17 children had died waiting for medicine that never arrived. Danny had sworn then that he would find a way to bring down. Felt something shift in her perception of this human. He was not motivated by profit or personal gain. He wanted justice for people he had never met, children from a world he would probably never visit. This kind of thinking was foreign to her experience. Danny explained his plan. Operated his criminal enterprise from a fortified compound on the station's lower levels. Station security knew he was a criminal but could not touch him because they lacked evidence that would hold up under the neutral laws that govern Nexus Station. Kept records of all his activities, including the names of corrupt officials he had bribed and the details of every illegal operation he had run. These records were stored on a secure server in his private office. If someone could get those records and deliver them to the right authorities, organization would collapse. His bribed officials would turn against him to save themselves. His victims would finally have proof of what he had done to them. His empire of fear and exploitation would crumble. The problem was getting inside. Danny brought up a blueprint of his compound. The security was impressive: multiple checkpoints, armed guards, electronic surveillance, and automated defense systems. A direct assault would be suicide. A conventional infiltration would require resources that Danny did not have. But Danny had noticed something during his months of observation. Had installed human-made security systems throughout his compound. He had done this because human technology had a reputation for reliability, which was ironic given how many species dismissed humans as primitive. Danny knew these systems intimately. He knew their weaknesses, their blind spots, and exactly how to exploit them. What he needed was someone who could move through the compound without being detected, someone small and fast and comfortable in darkness, someone who could reach places that human eyes could not see and human bodies could not fit. He needed understood immediately. Her species had evolved as nocturnal hunters on a world of dense forests and deep caves. She could see perfectly in conditions that would leave a human completely blind. She could move in silence across surfaces that would creak and groan under heavier feet. She could fit through ventilation shafts and maintenance crawlways that would stop any larger being. She was, she realized, exactly what Danny had been missing from his plan for the past 8 months. She asked why he had not simply found another to help him. Danny smiled and told her that he had been looking for the right person, not just the right species. He needed someone desperate enough to take the risk but not so broken that they could not be trusted. He needed someone who had fallen into darkness through circumstance rather than choice. He needed someone who, underneath their fear and desperation, still had a core of decency that could be reached. When he had noticed her following him, he had started observing her in return. He had seen how she avoided hurting others whenever possible. He had noticed how she gave food to homeless children in the lower levels when she thought no one was watching. He had observed the guilt in her eyes every time she prepared to commit a crime. He told her that he had allowed her to follow him into that corridor because he wanted to see what she would do when given the chance. And she had confirmed what he suspected. She was not a criminal. She was a good person trapped in an impossible situation. Felt tears threatening to return. No one had ever looked at her and seen anything worth saving. Her own people had dismissed her as a failure when she could not find legitimate work. Enforcers treated her as nothing more than a tool to be used and discarded. Even she had started to believe that she was worthless. This human, this stranger she had tried to rob, saw something different. She told him she would help. Danny nodded as if he had expected nothing else. He began explaining the details of the plan, walking her through the layout of his compound and the route she would need to take. He showed her the location of the server room and taught her how to use the data extraction device he had prepared. He explained the timing, the signals they would use to communicate, and the backup plans for every scenario he could imagine. As listened, she realized something that surprised her. She was not afraid anymore. For the first time in months, she felt something that resembled hope. When Danny finished his explanation, he looked at her with serious eyes. He told her that this would be dangerous. He told her that guards would kill her without hesitation if they caught her. He told her that he could not guarantee the plan would work or that either of them would survive. Then he asked if she still wanted to do this. Thought about her debt and her fear and the impossible future that had stretched before her just hours ago. She thought about the children who had died because of greed and the countless others who had suffered under his cruelty. She thought about the strange human standing before her, offering her a chance at redemption she had never imagined possible. She told him she was ready. The lower levels of Nexus Station smelled like recycled air and old machinery. Crouched in a ventilation shaft above his compound, watching the guards patrol below through gaps in the metal grating. Her heart pounded against her ribs, but her hands were steady. Danny's voice came through the tiny communicator tucked into her ear, calm and reassuring despite the danger they both faced. He told her the patrol pattern was about to shift. She would have a window of 40 seconds to reach the next access point. Waited until the guards turned a corner, then moved. She flowed through the darkness like water, her claws finding silent purchase on the metal surfaces. The shaft was narrow and uncomfortable, but her body was designed for exactly this kind of movement. She reached the next junction in 32 seconds and paused to catch her breath. Danny praised her timing and gave her the next set of instructions. They had spent the entire previous day preparing for this moment. Danny had walked her through every detail of the compound's security systems, explaining how they worked and how she could avoid triggering them. He had made her memorize the layout until she could navigate it with her eyes closed. He had given her equipment, the data extraction device, a signal jammer, and a small explosive charge that she hoped she would not need to use. Most importantly, he had given her something she had almost forgotten how to feel: confidence. Continued through the ventilation system, following the route Danny had mapped for her. She passed above rooms where enforcers played cards and argued about money. She moved over corridors where guards stood watch with weapons ready. She squeezed through gaps that would have stopped any larger being and dropped silently into passages that led deeper into the compound. Danny's voice guided her at every step. He warned her about motion sensors she could not see and patrol routes she needed to avoid. When she made mistakes, he stayed calm and found solutions. When she succeeded, he offered quiet encouragement that somehow meant more than any praise she had received in her life. She reached the server room after 20 minutes of careful movement. The door was locked with both electronic and physical security, but Danny had prepared for this. He talked her through the process of bypassing the lock, his knowledge of human security systems proving as valuable as he had promised. The server room was small and cold, filled with humming machinery and blinking lights. Moved to the central console and connected Danny's extraction device. The screen displayed streams of data flowing from systems, financial records, communications logs, lists of bribes and blackmail material, evidence of every crime he had committed during his years of operation. Danny told her the download would take 3 minutes. She needed to stay calm and wait. Those 3 minutes felt like hours. Every sound made flinch. Every shadow seemed to hide a guard preparing to discover her. She kept her hand on the pulse knife Danny had returned to her, ready to fight if necessary but hoping she would not have to. The extraction device chimed softly. The download was complete. Disconnected the device and tucked it into her bag. She turned toward the ventilation shaft she had used to enter, ready to retrace her route to safety. The door behind her slid open. A guard stood in the doorway, a male whose armored body filled the entire frame. His weapon was already raised, aimed directly at her chest. He demanded to know who she was and what she was doing. His mind went blank with panic. She could not fight her. Their species was twice her size and covered in natural armor that could deflect small arms fire. She could not run because he was blocking the only exit she could reach quickly. She was trapped. Danny's voice came through her communicator, steady and calm as always. He told her to duck. She obeyed without thinking, dropping to the floor just as an explosion tore through the wall behind the guard. The stumbled forward, disoriented by the blast, scrambled past him and into the corridor, running toward the emergency exit Danny had identified as a backup escape route. Behind her, she heard alarms beginning to wail. The entire compound was coming awake, guards rushing to respond to the explosion and the intruder in their midst. Danny's voice guided her through the chaos. He told her where to turn, where to hide, where the guards were concentrated, and where she could slip through their lines. He seemed to know the compound better than the people who worked there, predicting movements and finding paths that should have been impossible to navigate. Burst through a maintenance door and found herself in a loading area near the compound's external entrance. Freedom was only 100 meters away, a passage that would take her back to the public areas of the station where authority meant nothing. Then she heard Danny's voice change. The calm was still there, but underneath it she detected something new: worry. He told her to keep running and not to look back. He told her that he had been spotted creating the distraction and that guards were closing on his position. He told her to get the evidence to station security and make sure paid for his crimes. Stopped running. She asked what was happening to him. Danny did not answer immediately. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. He told her that the guards had found him. He told her that he was probably going to be captured. He told her that none of that mattered as long as she completed the mission. Stood frozen in the loading area, the exit so close she could feel the different air pressure from the public corridor beyond. She thought about everything Danny had done for her. He had seen her as something more than a criminal. He had given her hope when she had none. He had trusted her with his plan and treated her as a partner rather than a tool. She could not abandon him. Danny's voice became urgent. He told her to run, to complete the mission, to save herself. He insisted that he was not important, that the evidence was all that mattered, that she should not throw away her life for someone she had just met. Turned around and ran back into the compound. Danny's protests faded as she disabled her communicator and focused on retracing her path. She did not have his guidance now, but she remembered the layout he had taught her. She knew where they would take him for interrogation. She knew the routes the guards would use to transport a prisoner. And she knew something else, something she had only recently learned to believe. Humans gave second chances. They saw potential where others saw failure. They risked themselves for strangers and formed bonds with people who had tried to hurt them. Maybe it was time to show them that other species could do the same. Danny sat in a chair with his hands bound behind his back, watching pace across the interrogation room. The crime lord was a massive and muscular, with skin like gray stone and eyes that had witnessed countless acts of cruelty without blinking. Two of his enforcers stood by the door, their weapons trained on Danny's chest. Demanded to know how Danny had gotten the compound's security codes. He demanded to know who Danny was working with. He demanded to know where the extraction device had gone. Danny said nothing. He kept his expression calm and his breathing steady, showing no fear despite the very real possibility that he was about to die. This seemed to infuriate more than any defiance. The crime lord stepped closer, his massive hand wrapping around Danny's throat. He lifted the human off the chair as easily as lifting a child and brought their faces close together. He promised that Danny would answer his questions eventually. He promised that the pain would become unbearable. He promised that before this night ended, Danny would beg for death. Danny looked into those cruel eyes and smiled. He told that it did not matter what happened in this room. The extraction device was already beyond reach. The evidence was on its way to people who would use it to destroy everything the crime lord had built. Even if killed him slowly over the course of days, the outcome would be the same. His compound would fall. His empire would crumble. His name would become a warning that parents told their children when they wanted to frighten them into obedience. Snarled and threw Danny across the room. The human crashed into the wall and slid to the floor, pain exploding through his body. But he kept smiling because he knew something did not. Humans were not afraid of pain. They had evolved on a world that tried to kill them in 1,000 different ways. They had survived ice ages and predators and diseases that should have wiped them out. They had looked at the stars and decided to reach them despite knowing the journey would be dangerous beyond imagination. Pain was just another obstacle to overcome. Pulled a blade from his belt and approached Danny with murder in his eyes. He told Danny that the human would regret his defiance. He told Danny that death would not come quickly. The wall behind exploded. Station security forces poured through the opening, their weapons firing stun rounds that dropped the two enforcers before they could react. Spun around, confusion and rage warring on his face as armored officers surrounded him. And there, standing in the gap where the wall had been, was. She held the extraction device in one hand and a security officer's communicator in the other. Her fur was singed from the explosion she had triggered, and exhaustion made her movements slow. But her eyes were bright with triumph as she watched his world collapse around him. She had done it. Instead of running to safety, she had contacted station security and given them the evidence they needed to take action. She had led them directly to his compound and personally guided them to the interrogation room where Danny was being held. Security officers secured and dragged him away, his threats and protests fading as they forced him through the compound. Other officers moved through the building, arresting enforcers and gathering additional evidence. The crime empire that had terrorized this station for years was ending in a single chaotic night. Rushed to Danny's side and helped him sit up, she asked if he was badly hurt. Danny laughed, even though it made his bruised ribs ache. He told her that he had been hurt worse and that he would survive. Then he asked why she had come back for him. Did not answer immediately. She helped him stand, supporting his weight when his legs threatened to give out. Finally, she told him that humans were not the only species capable of doing stupid things for strangers. Danny laughed again, harder this time. The aftermath took several hours. Security officers took statements from both of them. Medical personnel treated Danny's injuries, which were painful but not life-threatening. Officials reviewed the evidence had extracted and began issuing warrants for everyone connected to his organization. When dawn cycle arrived on the station, Danny sat in a small cafe near the security headquarters. They were exhausted and battered, but they were alive and free. Was in a cell. His debt had been erased when the crime lord's assets were seized. The nightmare that had driven her to attempted robbery was finally over. Danny looked at her across the table and asked what she planned to do now. Admitted she did not know. Her old job was gone. Her reputation among her own people was damaged. She had nowhere to go and no one waiting for her anywhere in the galaxy. Danny told her that he had been looking for a crew member. His cargo operation was small, but it was growing. He needed someone who could handle security, someone who could move quietly and see in the dark and squeeze through tight spaces. Someone he could trust. Reminded him that she had tried to rob him less than 3 days ago. Danny shrugged. He told her that everyone made mistakes. What mattered was what people did after those mistakes. She had come back for him when she could have run. She had risked her life for someone she barely knew. That told him everything he needed to know about who she really was. Felt tears forming in her eyes for the third time since meeting this strange human. She asked him why humans were like this. Why did they forgive so easily? Why did they trust people who had given them every reason to be suspicious? Why did they offer second chances when logic and survival instincts said they should not? Danny considered the question seriously before answering. He told her that humans had learned something during their long history of suffering and survival. He told her that the galaxy was hard and cold and often cruel. He told her that survival required more than strength or speed or clever claws. It required connection. It required the ability to look at a stranger and see a potential ally instead of a threat. It required the courage to trust even when trust seemed foolish. Humans were not the strongest or fastest species in the galaxy, but they understood that nobody survived alone. They built bonds with anyone who proved worthy of trust. They gave chances to people who needed them. And sometimes, those chances created allies who would stand beside them when the darkness came. Wiped her eyes and asked Danny when they were leaving. Danny smiled, stood up, and offered her his hand. Together, they walked toward the docking bay where his ship waited. Behind them, the station continued its endless cycle of trade and conflict, unaware that something small but significant had changed. A human and a who should have been enemies had become partners instead. The galaxy was still hard and cold and often cruel, but it was also full of possibilities, connections waiting to be made, alliances waiting to be formed, second chances waiting to be given. All it took was someone willing to see beyond first impressions. All it took was someone human enough to try.